Greetings, welcome, our beloved colleague, family Nick. We appreciate you and all that you do for so many. And as always at Setsi, we begin all things by acknowledging our creator, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So Nick, can you please introduce yourself to the people, to our listeners and viewers, and share a little bit about your remarkable work?
Thank you so much, Victor, for having me on. My name is Nick Crighton. I'm originally from Waterhen Lake First Nation, which is in Treaty 6 territory, nêhiyaw. I grew up there and spent a lot of time there, obviously, but now I live in Regina, Saskatchewan, which is in Treaty 4 territory, and I've been here for about 20 years. I've spent a lot of my time I've been very fortunate, Victor, to work in the public, nonprofit, and private sector around the theme of Indigenous engagement, whatever that looks like. If that's community work, community involvement, grassroots, working in the procurement or supply chain, or even in HR and recruitment and retention and what that looks like. And so getting Indigenous people involved in employment, in the supply chain, or even engaged in whatever that may look like, whatever their passion is, it's something that I'm motivated by, and it's something that I feel like I have the privilege to be in, and I want that opportunity to bridge the gap between the Indigenous community and the non-Indigenous community. And so like I said, I've been very fortunate to work in all of those different sectors in and around Indigenous engagement. And so, and I'm appreciative that you invited me on to share a little bit about what I do and go from there.
Ashe, thank you so much. You do so much for so many. And I feel like voices like yours are more important than any because you're on the ground doing the work. And as well, I've always been a fan of the actual insights that you share and the way you approach this work in terms of community building and development. So once again, I give thanks. Madasi pa pa pa. So my next question is,
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
inspiring you right now? What has you curious? What has you passionate?
Young people. I'm excited by young people. I'm fortunate that I have kids like you, Victor. I have children, and uh what I'm inspired by is, for 20 years, the growth hasn't changed with the Indigenous population is still the youngest and the fastest growing demographic across our country. And what's inspiring to me is seeing their access to information and their ability to speak up. When I was growing up, and I'm not 100% sure what it was like for you growing up, but going around the adults table when my parents or my aunties were all visiting, I would want to sit there and they would be like, go play, go play. You know what I mean? Or get lost or whatever. And so my voice was almost being suppressed. And you find that in schools, you find that in workplaces, all of that. We kind of have this attitude towards young people that they don't have enough life experience to have a valid opinion. Now our young people have access to information, they have a voice, and not only do they have a voice, they demand to be heard. And I think quite often we see what inspires me is that they're speaking up, and it's exciting to see young people speaking up. I often talk about, and there's many young activists out there, but there's this young girl named Autumn Peltier. They spent a lot of time talking about Greta Thunberg and the work that she's doing, which is beautiful, but it's nice it's time that we start shining the light on our people of color, our Indigenous people, our brothers and sisters that have that same voice, the original, like we talked about earlier, the original stewards of the land and the water, and let them speak up and be that person. And everybody should know Autumn Peltier's name across Canada, not only across Canada, but internationally at that same level. And so, going back to what inspires me, my family, my kids, the things that I've faced, just like my partner or others, and it's a common experience, is I want my kids in the future to hold their heads up high and be proud of who they are and their identity. For so many years, when I first moved here from a small town, I had my hoodie up, and I in my first or couple of years of university, I didn't feel like I belonged, or I didn't feel like I had the opportunity to say anything, or that I should even say anything, or I have the right to say anything. It wasn't until I got older to realize that I got more comfortable with who I am, more comfortable in my identity of who I am, that I felt like I had the need to speak up. And I often think about when I'm going through challenges or difficult times, I'll call my cook-up, who's a residential school survivor, or my mom or whoever. And if I'm having a hard day or something like that, I'll then have conversations, and she'll make a little joke saying, "Oh, did you go to residential school, or did you do this?" And I'm like, "No, no, no." And then it's almost a little bit of a wake-up call on, maybe I'm dealing with some challenges at work, or maybe I'm dealing with a difficult individual, but I always try to think about it as I want to be able to provide a voice for the people that are historically voiceless. And I have that platform, and I have that opportunity. And how can I use my position of privilege to be able to amplify voices in a way that's going to be authentic and get the point of view across? Quite often, we're being told from like a Eurocentric worldview. This is the way the story is being told, and this is how it is. These are the facts. Whereas that's only one lens that you're looking at. You need to be looking at both sides of the story, multiple sides of the story, and contributions to who we are. And so that's what inspires me. I love the work that I do. I couldn't do the things that I do if I didn't have my family to support me. I have a very wonderful partner. I have my kids teach me more than I know. They teach me how to be a parent. They teach me how to be a good person. And so that's what I do it for, and that's what inspires me. So, yeah,
Ashay, that's absolutely beautiful and resonates heavily, heavily with my why I wake up every day. So I appreciate
yeah, yeah.
I appreciate that. So my next question is, what challenges and barriers do you face in your work? And what are some of the approaches you're taking to overcome these barriers and challenges?
That's a good question, Victor. I appreciate that question because the reality is I live in Saskatchewan. And I don't know how much you know about Saskatchewan, Victor, but we're probably about 50 or 60 years behind when it comes to policy, education, societal norms, all of those kinds of things. And I think some of the challenges I see out there is community education, uh, being educated in the our young people. You talk a lot about, we are not you, but the world talks, or the elected officials, right? The MPs, the MLAs, whatever level of government, whether it be federal or provincial or municipal, they say our young people are our future, and we have to start thinking about our young people as our now, because ultimately if we aren't planning for those young people, I don't want my kids and my grandkids or great grandkids, if I'm so lucky, to start asking me questions when I'm older. And what did you do to change the narrative? What did you do to ensure that we have an opportunity to have a voice? Um, and I really think it starts with curriculum in the schools, but I also think it starts at your kitchen table, right? I think that's the biggest thing, is that our children are now having the opportunity to learn about how diverse our country is, and how important it is to continue to keep it diverse, because we have so much value to offer our communities. The challenge I see sometimes is that there is apprehension from policymakers, decision-making authorities, um, curriculum developers, or even just these large bureaucratic structures, whether that's the provincial school system, whether that's local school systems, whatever that looks like, where they're so unwilling to make curriculum changes that are going to be a lot more inclusive and a lot more healthy for our young people, and I think sometimes I think some of the things that are being passed is that we're going backwards before we even go forward. And I think it's important that those things need to be recognized. On another level, outside of high school or outside of the education piece, I think the challenges come with a lack of uh, maybe there's not as much willingness to learn what you don't know. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of people, they'll learn about residential schools, they'll learn about the railroads, they'll learn about concentration camps, they'll learn about slavery, they'll learn about what happened to the Ukrainians, and they'll learn about these things. But when it gets to be too much, they can't handle it. Do you know what I mean? That guilt starts to come in. And I always try to remind people, don't feel guilty for things that you were never taught in school. And it's not your job to take on that guilt, because you shouldn't be paying for the sins of your ancestors. But now that you know this knowledge, what are you going to do with it? You have a responsibility. We can't, speaking specifically on truth and reconciliation, people are quick, right, to run to reconcile. Oh, we're going to reconcile super hard. We want to say, we said, I'm sorry. What do you guys want to do? Let's move forward. Instead of coming in and being like a white knight and saying, I have a solution for your problem, allow Indigenous people, allow the BIPOC community to decide what our solutions look like, driven by us, led by us, because we have a voice. And far too often, I think I see we are we're so used to, and the government sees it this way, it's a Eurocentric way of thinking, is that they often say, this is how we can help you. If you do this, you will succeed. You'll get out of poverty. There's a lot of telling and not enough asking. And I think that what needs to happen is, in order for collaboration and full truth and reconciliation, there needs to be more asking, because there's a difference between what's happening in Coast Salish territory and their priorities versus what's happening in the Mi'kmaq territory in the Maritimes, right? In the fisheries there, or in Nunavut, or in the prairies. You cannot broad stroke all Indigenous people, or even the entire BIPOC community, with one brush. You have to be able to give them a voice and an opportunity to be a part of that solution, but also come up with those solutions themselves. And not only coming them up and us providing them, and understanding that they're not recommendations. They're not, hey, we recommend you do this. This is an actual call to action. This is something that if you don't do, it's going to put you farther back. We don't want you to say, hey, we recommend you do all of these things. It's time for you to start putting pen to paper. It's time for you to start making actual changes, and start to see that, changes aren't going to happen overnight, but they aren't going to happen tomorrow if you're not willing to get yourself in those uncomfortable and start having those uncomfortable conversations. And I've said this, and it's been said before, is that you have to start getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And in 2021, May of 2021, Canada found out, and they kind of got the light spread, or the light shared on them, about the unmarked graves at residential schools that were found in and around Kelowna. I forget the name of the community, forgive me. And that opened a lot of Canadians' eyes, right? A lot of them can go back to their high school, and right beside or outside of their high school, there isn't a cemetery. There isn't headstones. There's no field where there's a bunch of buried bodies, or whatever that looks like. That kind of experience, it's okay to talk about our past. It's okay to acknowledge what happened. I believe that if we don't acknowledge what happened, we're not going to learn from our past so we can prepare for the future. And I think that's an important part of who we are as Canadians. And I think sometimes, or people that live in Canada, however you define yourself, and your own sovereignty and what that looks like. But in the average Canadian was shocked by that news. Now that you know that information, what are you doing? What are you doing in your home? What are you doing in your workplace? How are you taking some responsibility to shed some light on that and understand that it did happen? I use the comparison of Germany. In Germany, they make it mandatory to teach in elementary and secondary schools about their history. It's mandatory. It's written in the curriculum, and it's because they don't want to repeat those same mistakes. We need to start making it mandatory in our schools. We need to start taking a look at and talking about how we can make those positive changes to ensure the goal is should be the goal should always be to get smarter. You know what I mean? Or to evolve. Language evolves, curriculum evolves. We no longer, have these exclusionary how am I going to say this? We still had a lot of exclusionary laws that were in place that promoted discrimination and racism and segregation. And now we're in 2024. I want my kids to have more knowledge than I do. I want them to be smarter. I want them to have as much opportunities. I want my kids to walk into the bank and not be questioned why they're there. I want them to walk into a store and not be followed by a walker or a security guard or whatever that looks like. And so I think the challenges that lie ahead are mostly when it comes down to education, and then understanding that uh, our communities don't want to live in the past either. And I also want to remember that is that we also don't want to be seen as victims, and everybody's on their own path, personal path to truth and reconciliation. Some people are still at the truth stage, and that's okay. Some people are in the middle and others are ready to go into that reconciliation stage, but understand that not everybody is on the same spectrum, or maybe people are still going to be in the truth for a little while because it's affected them differently. You know what I mean? So I ramble on, Victor, but I do believe that those are some of the challenges. But to me, it excites me. It excites me because I wouldn't have the job that I have. I wouldn't be doing the things that I'm doing. And I'm passionate about trying to share as much knowledge as possible. I don't believe that this knowledge that I've gained over my career or even research or some of the books that I've read. I'm not a big reader, but I try to read some of the more books that are going to help me in my career or help me in my life. Um, but I don't believe that knowledge belongs to me per se. I believe that I need to pass it on. And those are traditional teachings that were taught to me, because it's useless. If I were, once I complete my circle of life, and I'm no longer here, what happens to that knowledge that I've gained? I want to be able to pass it on to others and take what you find useful and then leave the rest. I think that's an important thing that I've always been taught, is that find some things that you can relate to and put them in your own life and do what you can. And if there are things that are not useful to you, then that you don't need to retain that information. Anyways, I'm going to continue. If you don't ask another question, Victor, I'll just start rambling down another path. But
No,
yeah,
that was beautiful, and I didn't want to interrupt because you weren't rambling at all. You were speaking truth, and I think that there's so much that resonated for me personally in terms of African-centered principles of Sankofa. Go back and fetch
yeah,
it, and a Adinkra symbol that's so important. And even when you spoke about young people, and so in Nigeria, there's a Yoruba proverb that speaks to the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And that Yoruba proverb is so important because a lot of times there is this notion that young people are to be seen, not heard. And I think that you, one, raising the voice of our beloved a youth leader, Autumn, and other young people across our nation is imperative, but also bringing up the fact that folks are at the different points around the continuum of truth and reconciliation. But the truth is important and reconciliation is imperative. So once again, you weren't rambling, you were speaking truth, and I appreciate your remarkable leadership. So my last question for you is, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for our listeners and our viewers?
I think the biggest thing that I do want to, well, I have a couple of things, and I'll try and keep it succinct. But ultimately, what I'm excited by, and you see it in pop culture, is representation. And I think that's a very important thing. My wife is Chilean. And when we watched, now I'm forgetting the name of this Disney movie, but we watched that show. What's it called?
Is it Coco?
Not Coco. That's a good one too. It's the one where the house is alive. the young girl, they get special powers. I don't know if you've watched it. I forget the name of it. It'll come to me when we
My
stop
daughters will be
recording.
mad at me. I'm sure they.
But even things like Moana, right? Like watching those, that representation on there, my kid can see themselves. You know what I mean? You and I never necessarily had the opportunity to see ourselves. And if we saw ourselves, we were seen as caricatures. You know what I mean? Or stereotypes. And I think that's a very important message, is that when pop culture starts to see it, there's a new show that came out, I think a Marvel show called Echo. And there's a young girl that plays the, I'm gonna forget her name. I already forgot her name, but plays Echo, or the main character, and she's deaf. And that, not only is she a superhero for the deaf community, but also the Indigenous community and the Native Americans and the deaf community. A side note, even sign language, where that came from, American Sign Language, that all kind of had a base on what's called native hand talking. And and that is a lost language that was used because many Indigenous people used to gather at different ceremonial sites, and they would share. There would be markets, and they would share ceremonies, or they would share food or clothes or whatever that looked like, right? And they didn't all speak the same language, but they could all hand talk, and they understood that language. And I wanted to touch on that because I think that's super important. I think that's super cool. I think representation is important, and I think when segueing from representation, another important thing to understand is letting young people know that they belong, that their voice is important. Um, and they, not only do they belong, but they have a right to be heard. They have a right to be understood, and they have a right to be listened to. And I think that's the biggest thing that inspires me and that I'm excited about, is seeing young people have that voice. And I want them to walk into these, whatever they're doing, if they're going into a trade school, if they're going into university, if they're going anywhere, to hold their heads high and be proud of who they are, and what their identity is, and what that looks like. Because so many people came before them to fight for that opportunity to have a voice. Now that it's here, I want that opportunity for our young people to be able to speak out. And I think that's a really important thing. And when it comes to call to action, I think truth and reconciliation is an individual journey. And before you start your truth and reconciliation journey, you need to start taking a look at yourself first, and you need to start talking about it at the kitchen table, as we talked about before. Have those conversations, you know, around the holiday seasons or whatever that looks like. You have that one uncle, or that knows absolutely everything, right? Because they follow somebody on social media, on TikTok or whatever that looks like, and they're usually the loudest, they're usually the most obnoxious, but what they say sometimes, they're not backed up by facts. Don't be afraid to have those discussions with the people that are closest to you, and start feeling comfortable having. Then once you start having those discussions in your own homes, then you can start expanding to your workplaces and your environment, your communities, your volunteer groups, your committees, whatever that looks like. I think that's a journey that begins at home first, and then go from there. And another piece that I think is important is understanding, there's two words that are popular that get thrown around, is indigenization and decolonization. I always try to remind people that indigenization allow the space for indigenous subject matter experts to take care of the indigenization piece. Everyone can decolonize. Take a look at your organization, take a look at it, and compare those colonial practices and say, how can I make this more inclusive? And then bring in people. But do the work too. We can't do all of the labor for you. As the BIPOC community, we're often, hey, teach me about your trauma, teach me about your history, and you're like, you realize, you're like, man, I did all the work to deal with my trauma. Now you're re-triggering me and making me talk about things that I don't want to revisit, or I've dealt with before. It's not our job necessarily to hold your hand as you walk through and learn about these histories. And I think that's an important piece. And there's a little bit of balance that happens there. And I'm not saying, hey, fend for yourself. but don't rely solely on your BIPOC friend or family member or colleague to do that work for you. You got to start doing that work for yourself. So
Incredible. You never disappoint, family. And you're never rambling. I so appreciate
that's
your
you're
consistency.
so kind, Victor. You're so kind.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Honestly, I appreciate your leadership and your stellar activism. And not just that, the way you're able to share your passion in a way that's deeply profound, respectful, articulate, and clear, where because a lot of times when we are passionate about our people and the traumas that have been inflicted on our people, sometimes hurt people hurt people. And I have brothers and sisters in my network sometimes that are very passionate about their cause and passionate about the traumas that have impacted communities that are sometimes equity denied groups or global majority groups. And I feel like I'm always inspired by folks that are able to make it very clear and do it in a way that doesn't re-traumatize those that are listening, but also if folks take offense, that's fine. Because you're sharing, but the intention isn't to offend. You know what I mean? And I think you speak with a place of deep introspection and love. So once again, Regina, I appreciate you. I appreciate all that you do for so many. And as always at SETC, we close the way we began this conversation by acknowledging our creator, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various waters and lands that we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much, Nick, for all that you do for
Thank you. And you continue your great work because you are doing great work, Victor. You're providing a platform to amplify the BIPOC community in a very beautiful way. And I truly appreciate the opportunity to come and share a little bit of my own thoughts. So yeah, continue to keep doing what you're doing and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, fam.